Okay, so you have seen Drew's report, and you've been hearing for weeks about these possible voter registration problems with ACORN. Let's bring in now Miles Rapoport. He is the president of DEMOS. It is a nonpartisan public policy research organization. And John Funn, he wrote the book. It's called Stealing Elections, and he is a reporter for the Wall Street Journal. Thanks to both of you. Miles, I want to start with you as an overseer of raising money for organizations. Do you think this is much ado about nothing? I think that's what your take is on it.
I think it's much ado about little. I think there are obviously some problems with the voter registration forms that ACORN has turned in, but A, the organization is working with local election officials to try to make sure that the problems are resolved, and B, I think the real issue here is that there's going to be a huge turnout in the election, maybe 10 or 15% higher, and it's important, as a former Secretary of the State, it's important for election officials to be ready to do everything possible to encourage people to vote. We've been bemoaning the fact in America for years that people don't vote.
I've got to ask you this, Miles, but isn't it important, too, for the same election officials to make sure that the voters on the rolls are actually accurate and are, in fact, people?
Yes, it is. And I think that actually, if there is fraudulent behavior, it ought to be investigated and it ought to be prosecuted.
Okay.
But I do think that the incidences of fraud, real voter fraud, over the last 10, 15 years is very, very limited. The real issue is making sure that everybody gets their right to vote, and gets their vote counted.
John Funn, do you agree with what he's saying? And I'll ask you on top of that, do you think this is politically motivated?
Well, I think we can have a large voter turnout, and I also think we can have integrity in elections. There are two civil rights here. We want to make sure everyone has the chance to vote. We also want to make sure that no one's vote is canceled out by someone who's voting twice, shouldn't be voting, or doesn't even exist.
But he said it's much ado about little. He doesn't think it's a big deal. So that's why I ask you, is it politically motivated? Is it a big deal?
Well, why don't you call the Democratic Secretary of State in Nevada, Ross Hunter, who led the raid on ACORN's offices in Nevada. He says he is very disappointed in ACORN because they made lots of promises that they were going to clean up their act and they didn't do it. Maybe you should call Mr. Lomax, who's the registrar of voters in Las Vegas, who says ACORN's attempt at quality control of these registrations was, quote, pathetic, unquote. Now, maybe you should call the deputy director of elections in St. Louis, Mark Potter, who's a Democrat. And he says ACORN constantly makes promises every election that they're going to clean up their act, and they never deliver.
I hear Miles.
Those are Democrats.
I hear Miles grunting and shaking his head.
But they're Democrats.
Miles, go ahead.
Well, I just think that the single-minded focus on ACORN and the way they're doing their registrations, I think it is politically motivated. I think it's a way of trying to discourage people from going out and registering to vote and raising questions about whether their registrations are going to be valid. People should absolutely check their registrations, make sure they're valid, and election officials should go over those registration forms, make sure they're accurate. People do have to bring voter identification.
Miles, can I ask a question?
Sure.
Talking Points memo. Pat Caddell, who is the pollster for Gary Hart, these Democratic officials in Nevada and Missouri all have serious complaints and concerns about ACORN, even though they support the laudable goals of ACORN. Why do you think all of these people on the left raise questions or have problems with ACORN? Why?
There may be some quality control issues, but A, I know they're trying. B, I know that there is a
But they say this every 2 years. They say they're going to try, and they never succeed.
Oh, John, I have to ask you this too. If you're talking about, it happened in 2000, 2002, 2004 with ACORN.
2006.
And 2006. But there are also reports on the Democratic side. If you say that this is political, that there's always a voter suppression campaign. Then that is a charge for the Democrats for the Republicans.
I know there are flyers that are distributed in some neighborhoods that occasionally say vote on Wednesday, when of course we all know the election is on Tuesday. If those people are ever caught, obviously they should be prosecuted.
But my question is, why not the outrage when
I've denounced it. There's a whole section of my book called Republican Strong-Arm Tactics. These tactics are detestable.
Let's hope for the best this year. I'm looking forward to a really, really big turnout, an election where there's very little attempt at voter suppression on the conservative side, where there's very little incidence of problems on the registration side, and where people get out and actually really vote in huge numbers.
Miles, I've got to ask you this. Let me get in here, guys, because I want to ask you this. We're running out of time here real quickly, and just a short answer. According to the report, one person says not voter fraud because people haven't voted yet. Another person says it is because the signatures aren't valid. Miles, is it voter fraud?
No, it's not fraud. It may be error, but it's not fraud. We want people to register and vote. We shouldn't be discouraged.
John Funn, it is a voter fraud.
Well, if it's only error, why did people who have done this act in Seattle, Kansas City,
Is
and
it
St.
voter
Louis,
fraud, though, John?
They were prosecuted and they were jailed. So obviously it's fraud, because if it's error, they wouldn't be jailed. They were jailed for that crime.
John Fund, Miles Rapoport, thank you both very much.